Quick disclaimer before you listen. The World's Okayest Medic Podcast is an educational and commentary platform produced and recorded by me. What we say on here is not endorsed by any of our employers, and we are not speaking on behalf of our employers. Our commentary is our own. Finally, remember to follow your local protocols.
Are you ready? Well, let's get to the content. It's been a few weeks since I recorded an episode. Last Wednesday, I did post the really sick acidotic patients episode I did with Dan Rao. Thank you, Dan, for coming on to the podcast, and thank you all for downloading it and for the nice feedback that we have gotten on it. I think you're going to be seeing a little bit more of Dan. Definitely a good guest, and we've been in touch a lot, and glad I've gotten to know him, and I'm glad he came onto the podcast, so thank you. But I had recorded that probably a week before my beach vacation. So we were away last week. We went to Ocean City. We had a great week at the beach. And then I came back to work Sunday night. And I have been bitching, as you know, since Thanksgiving about a lack of hot jobs or good calls that really made the proverbial juices start flowing. I had the call from hell Monday night. I would consider it a critical stress incident, probably one of the top 3 in my career of high stress incidents that really, to use a cliche phrase, really tested the metal, and maybe even the top of the top 3. I'm not going to go into details about it because it is still fresh. It's still in the QA process. There were some great lessons, so you're going to be hearing about it when the time is right. It's not right now. Maybe in a couple weeks, maybe in a couple months. I don't know. But there are some lessons, things that went really, really well. There are some lessons about human factors and stress performance. And there are definitely some things to debrief that could have gone a lot smoother. And that's important. And we're going to segue into the topic today with that, because this topic today is all about introspection and self-appraisal and self-critique. So let's get into it. Before my beach vacation, for the month of May, I did a Random Ramblings episode, and it was 40 minutes of me talking into this microphone about the need to slow down, pause, and turn on that brain so that you can employ good decision-making, so that you don't make rash decisions under this assumption and this bullshit thought that we make as EMS providers split-second life or death decisions. That is simply not the case. That is hyperbole. It is bullshit. It is good for sound bites. It's good for cringe inspirational posts about what we do. But I submit, and I will argue this all day, that we don't make split-second life or death decisions. Monday night, Cam and I had to make a life or death decision. I was personally shitting my pants. I know she was too. Well, I don't want to speak for her, but I'm pretty sure she was. We still were able to thoughtfully discuss, map out a game plan, and come up with a best method of attack. And you'll hear all about it when the time is right. But in the episode I did in May, I went down a brief rabbit hole. It wasn't even the point of the podcast. And I talked about how over-dispatching and dramatic dispatching can lead to unnecessarily dangerous responses. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about Joe Q. Public or Jane Q. Public calls 911 because their 5-year-old has an ear infection. And they don't answer the call taker's questions in a manner that makes the pro QA algorithm work optimally. Does it ever is the question, but I digress. So the dispatcher, instead of putting the call in as an unknown medical problem or a sick person or something rational, the dispatcher puts out a hot call for a 5-year-old pediatric patient, unknown breathing. To refresh, here's a clip from the podcast that I turned into a reel that I posted on Instagram and YouTube. You know who is chief number 1 offender, in my opinion, for nicely putting drama on the T and setting people up to act like absolute idiots? Dispatch. Over-dispatching and dramatic dispatching set people up to turn their brains off, go into a call with anchoring bias, and perpetuates dangerous responses because there will invariably be people who hear some dramatic dispatching and drive 700 miles per hour to a 16-year-old with a cold because dispatch put it in as pediatric patient, sick person, priority, not alert, breathing not verified. And while I am talking about dramatic dispatching, can the dispatch centers around me please, for the love of Pete, use some friggin' discretion and take 2 seconds to stop and think when dispatching an accident as entrapment? You want to talk about dramatic dispatching. Station 12, Medic 2, helicopter on standby. State Route 2 and County Road 74. Motor vehicle accident. Subject reported trapped. Rescue assignment. So they send 9,000 units driving at light speed. They spin up a helicopter, and all for some low-speed BLS accident where all that is needed is a door pop on the driver's side because the hyperventilating and crying patient is too scared and rotund to climb out the passenger side. I think of the last 50 entrapment accidents I was dispatched to, maybe 2 of them were actual pin jobs, as they call them. Well, that reel, as far as first responder social media goes, went pretty damn viral. I think it's up to around 300,000 views at this point, thousands of shares. It would be the understatement of the year to say that there was a lot of butthurt among the dispatcher community, and they came out in force in the comments. And that is fine. I put the reel out there. I expected to get some flack from the dispatcher community. But I must be honest that I was really taken aback by what I read. Actually, I should say the content of what I read didn't really surprise me. That I kind of expected. What did cause me to be taken aback was the sheer volume of it. Now, I largely stayed out of the comments. I did engage in a couple of replies to some of the more constructive ones, but to these shitty ones, I think I only responded to 3 of them. One was to somebody who wrote a very pithy and biting comment directed towards me, an ad hominem attack, if you will, using the word probably spelled Probibly. And I responded that you can tell he is definitely a dispatcher based on the butchering of easy to spell words that seems mandatory when a dispatcher inputs CAD notes. I will give 2 other honorable mentions for comments. One goes to a very nice lady from Alabama. She commented that I should take my comments and shove them up my, and I quote, dark tunnel. And she followed that up with, I bet there is plenty of room. I have to admit that one did genuinely make me laugh. It wasn't so much the shoving my comments up my dark tunnel. Rather, it was the follow-up, the I bet there's plenty of room. So bravo, well done. The other honorable mention goes to this guy who appears to be a dispatcher for a police department in California. And I looked at his Facebook page, and it is full of inspirational quotes about being a 911 telecommunicator. And his photo section is rife with pictures of him posing in a Class A dispatcher's uniform at various dispatch ceremonies. He took the time to put the ho-hos and honey buns down, and he wrote a very long paragraph about how I must have, in the course of my career, solicited many dispatchers for sex and have been turned down by all of them. And I quote, even the ones who sleep with everyone. Now, the comment was quite a heavy mouthful, but he is a dispatcher, and dispatchers are world famous for oversized mouthfuls. I didn't respond. I wanted to. I considered replying with, no, I have never solicited a dispatcher for sex. I have a strict requirement that the width of a prospective mating partner's ass cannot be 2 times greater than the width of their shoulders, but I did not. I waited to do it on here so you all could enjoy. And there were lots of ad hominem attacks in the comments, but the reality is that the vast majority of the comments were reflexive knee-jerk responses that I would expect from an 8-year-old. You know, I usually just post and ghost. Sometimes I do loosely follow the comment section, but this time I was so put off. I can't even say angry. I would say it was a combination of disappointment and sheer disgust. I was so put off by what I was reading from these angry dispatchers that I read every single one of, as of today, the 448 comments. The reason that I was so put off wasn't because they disagreed with me. People disagree with me all the time, and I have good discussions with a lot of them. And I'm actually friends with a lot of people that I disagree with. You want to disagree with someone? Good. That's how intellectual discourse happens. Yes, I have vehemently disagreed with people on various issues, and I've been very outspoken about it. I know you're all going to go, he's going to talk about the Massachusetts blood thing. Yes, I vehemently disagree with the people up there, the doctors who are against ground transport carrying pre-hospital blood. You know that. But before I savaged the anti-pre-hospital blood crowd in the podcast, I didn't just reflexively knee-jerk do it. I did my research. I talked to a few people in the mix up there, and I read their flagship paper, which is an absolute embarrassment, but you've heard me say that, assessing the 1-month mortality impact of civilians setting pre-hospital transfusion. I didn't go to Harvard, but shameful. But I did a little bit of homework before putting myself out there and jumping up on the, hey, look at me, I'm disagreeing with you thing. So I will avoid the rabbit hole further on the blood thing. The point is that I didn't get pissed off at the angry dispatchers in the comments because they disagreed with me. It also wasn't because they really didn't seem to like me. I didn't seem to like me. They really didn't like me. It wasn't because some of them tried to insult me. The reason that I was so put off again and just disgusted was because I would say more than 90% of those comments was just whining, bitching, finger pointing, and making excuses. What I read was a lot of, and I'm paraphrasing here, a lot of, we are automatons. We can't deviate from what the caller tells us on the algorithm, which I do get. I am pondering having a dispatcher come on to talk about this. I don't know if I want to do the content yet, but I'm thinking about it. I do get that argument. I hear you. That's at least a valid point. I do think you can poke some substantial holes in the argument. Nevertheless, I will give it credit for being constructive. But the majority of the whining, reflexive, bitching, excuse-making comments were, it's not our fault. We have no say in how you respond. If you choose to drive fast to a hot call and crash, that's on you. We aren't there. How are we supposed to know if what a caller tells us is true or not? Oh, I don't know. Maybe ask a couple of clarifying questions. Here's my favorite one. You're not a dispatcher. You've never done the job. Therefore, you don't know what you're talking about and you cannot have an opinion. I'm not going to go into more thoughts on dispatch specific stuff like the algorithms or the system or how I think the system is flawed or my perspective as the other guy on the end of the radio. I've never been a dispatcher, but I have indeed spent a shitload of time in dispatch and in the 911 center. Another story for another time. I do have thoughts on the process, and I understand that dispatchers can't just disbelieve a caller and that they have to take what the caller is saying as fact, and that in most places they have to follow pro QA algorithms to the letter or face the wrath of the QA person. Nevertheless, I still think that there are plenty of situations where dispatchers can stop and think for a second. And not to get the back of MPDS or whoever makes dispatching programs, but I think if you asked them, they might have some input that their systems were designed with the assumption that the person using the system has a functioning brain. You know, just like dispatchers argue that their hands are tied, one could argue that we have our hands tied. We have to follow protocols. We can't just go off script and start practicing our own brand of medicine. I submit that a good EMS provider is innovative and knows not just the protocols, but how to use the protocols. And we discussed this in one of the chest pain episodes. If you remember, a lot of EMS providers wrote to me and said, under our protocols, we have to treat all chest pain like it's cardiac in nature. And I heard a lot of chest pain is automatically an ALS transport in my system, regardless of the etiology. And when I asked them to send me their protocols, which many did, That actually wasn't the case. It was dogma. And honestly, and I don't say this in a mean way, them not knowing the actual verbiage of the protocols. They understood the big points and the vibe, if you will, but they didn't know the fine print. And big life lesson is that the fine print is always more important than the selling price. I would suspect a similar thing would be at play with some of these pro QA protocols. Now, not necessarily how they ask questions and what resources they send. I do understand that run cards are developed by the jurisdiction, but maybe when someone calls 911 and says, my 14-year-old cut her wrists, they're not bleeding and they just look like scratches. Can you send someone because she needs a mental health examination and I just don't know what to do and I'm kind of scared? Maybe select a BLS laceration or a psychiatric emergency card for the whole PMD thing and not an ALS 27 Delta stabbing card. True story. That's going to generate a hell of a lot more unnecessary hot code 3 response than is necessary. But what do I know? I've never been a dispatcher. This may come across as harsh, but let the comments from the dispatchers serve as a reminder of what we don't want to be like. I have typically always been very supportive of 911 center staff, but I must say that if the comments thread that was authored by the dispatchers represents the greater diaspora of 911 telecommunicators, and I submit that I think it might, then I have lost respect. I've lost respect because I am a believer in hard introspection and in ruthless self-accountability. And that, save for a couple of the comments, was starkly absent in the comments section. The vast majority of them followed this rubric when making their statements. They reflexively impeach the person who dare say something about their profession. They proclaim, it's not my fault. And 3, they divert blame for anything bad that might happen. And frankly, it was fucking pathetic. It was gross. It was shameful. This is not what we want to be like. You know, they want to call themselves first responders and they drive their big lifted pickup trucks with an American flag with a thin yellow line all over the back window. And they get accolades for being out there on the front line and being the first line of defense. But when someone dares suggest, hey, here's an instance where I think you could be better, or here's a potential area of improvement, they deconstructed and then they reverted to deflection, blame, and the knee-jerk, unharnessed anger that is usually expressed by toddlers. Imagine if we did this. Hey, medic, that patient you intubated had a misplaced tube in the esophagus. They're not dead, but they have a massive anoxic brain injury. Oh yeah? Well, have you ever tried to intubate anyone in their house? Must be nice to only be able to do it in the bright light setting with all the help in the world that you might need to call. There were 3 dogs running around. There were crying kids, and the house was a hoarder house, and we had to intubate the guy in his bedroom. You're blaming me? I can't be expected to ensure scene safety, interpret an EKG, move the patient out of their hoarder house, and safely transport him to the hospital, and watch his end title on the monitor. Huh. Tell me you've never been a paramedic without telling me you've never been a paramedic. Are there EMS providers who act like this? Yes, and we should drum them out of the fucking profession. They are bottom feeders, and they make us all look bad. The real professionals, the true Gs, are the ones who constantly ask, what can I do to improve? And if it's after a call, what could I have done better? Now, this is different from unharnessed self-doubt. That is not good to have if you, and I'm saying this preemptively. If you want to DM me and ask how to control your self-doubt or what you should do about it, don't. Save your energy and ask an expert. Maybe a counselor or a psychologist. And I am not saying that in a flippant, nasty, dismissive way. I'm dead serious. I am not an expert in these matters, and the advice that I may give that works for me may not work for Jim, and I gave it to Paul. He may actually find that it makes things worse. So ask a professional. I always say Alex Jabber and Boomhauer, Stay Fit for Duty and Emergency Resilience on Instagram. They're great resources, and they truly are trained experts. You know, I do get a lot of DMs, a lot of questions, and actually pretty frequently about a wide array of topics where the honest answer that I have is, I have no idea. And this is one of them. So I have talked before about self-doubt and how a healthy dose of it is good. And in most people, it's much more prevalent and bothersome when you are younger in the profession. But I don't want to go down a rabbit hole about self-doubt. But what I'm getting at, somewhat meanderingly, and I find I'm saying somewhat meanderingly more and more as I do these podcasts because it's just a constant mental stream. I don't know. But if you have a call where you do something big, like you intubate someone, you cardiovert someone, you crike them, you pace them, you use a medication or a protocol to do some heavy hitting things to change their physiology, and you don't critically review things after the call and you debrief what went well, what didn't go well, and what didn't go wrong but could have, and what didn't go wrong but could have been done better, and what could have gone wrong but didn't, then you really should start doing so because it's going to make you a better provider. There cannot be true competence and mastery of anything without introspection, and tough introspection at that. And this was evidenced in force and then some this week after the hot call that Cameron and I responded to. We debriefed hard and honestly after the call. Some things, as I alluded to at the beginning of the podcast, went just friggin' swimmingly. And then some things did not go as smoothly as either of us would have liked. There are certainly lessons to be learned, and you're going to hear it here because it's good content and it's going to generate more views. Now, I'm kidding. The reason you're going to hear it is that we must share our experiences from high risk, low volume, critical calls because we as a whole don't get them enough. And if you can hear from the people who were in the thick of it, what worked, what didn't, and what to be prepared for, then you're going to get all that better. Debrief and critique is mandatory. It's the professional thing to do, and that kind of professionalism was dreadfully lacking in the comments section penned by the dispatchers. I think we also must debrief more generally, not just critical incidents and critical patients that we run. One of my goals with the podcast is to honestly self-critique EMS as a profession, as an entity, what have you. Yes, I love to serve up the red meat that people crave, and I love to stand up for us against the people who are trying to hold us back. I thoroughly enjoy dispelling dogma, and I even more thoroughly enjoy causing the cast of characters who go out and get professional headshots done and then wear Banana Republic general style dress uniforms. I love to make them have heartburn, but I also try and take a critical look inward and ask ourselves equally hard questions, which is very, very necessary. And this tends to rile people up, and sometimes in a not friendly way. People get very angry when I have said things like, not every EMS service should have the ability to push meds and intubate. You don't deserve to have that skill just because you are a paramedic. Another controversial thing is I have said we need to make EMS more difficult to enter as a profession. I've pissed people off when I've said that TEMS teams need to be made up of paramedics, physicians, and advanced providers only, and I don't think there's a space nor a role for EMTs in the mix. People disagree with me that EMTs and paramedics definitely need physician oversight. And I get the nerds riled up when I tell them that, yes, I have become a POCUS believer for pre-hospital care, but 7 out of 10 of the cool POCUS tricks that you learn are not necessary in the pre-hospital environment. And what is the point of you doing it? Demanding accountability and being tough at times, or as Cody so controversially said, chew ass, is very necessary when the situation calls for it. And as you know, the participation trophy kid generation got very upset by this. You want to talk about me saying things and self-critiquing and pissing off our EMS brethren? This dispatcher hate and the blow up in the comments is probably the worst I've experienced since starting the podcast and the social media. But the next worst was when I challenged the narrative that there is a shortage of EMS providers. The labor stats don't support it, and I argued that the actual reality is that there is a two-pronged problem out there. One is inappropriate utilization structure of ALS and BLS staffing, and the second, and the bigger problem in my opinion, is that the shortage isn't with EMS providers. Rather, the shortage is with EMS leaders who aren't worth a shit and they run shitty organizations that people don't want to work for. Hence, there's lots of vacancies. People went berserk when I said that. But I think it was a necessary self-critique, and I think it was a necessary discussion to have, and I'm not afraid to put myself out there and have those types of discussions. Even though the topics like this generate a fair amount of butthurt. The fact of the matter is that, yeah, shitty comments, they're annoying, but I am encouraged by us. And seeing the dispatchers over here really made me realize that we're over here as a profession. And the reason I say that is because I see EMS providers consistently engage in meaningful and at times hard conversations to make our profession better. Some positions I agree with, some I don't. I'm not saying that I am the arbiter of what is right and wrong. I am not. I am often wrong. And sometimes I do a 180-degree change of mind on something when I am provided a convincing argument, new information, new experiences, etc. Example, you guys changed my mind on POCUS. It was you, the listeners. But the point is that we are having conversations like this. We are discussing, we are debating, and when we do this, we get better because we are professionals, and this is what professionals do. Go to any professional organization. Well, I shouldn't say any. Go to a good one and go behind the scenes and behind the smiling group photos that are being posted on social media. And they are having intense, sometimes heated and passionate debates. You think that the American College of Surgeons or the NTOA just meets up and cries into a microphone about how people are mean to them? No, they debate and they disagree and they learn from each other to make their respective professions better. Now, the reflexive, pissed off, whiny children do come out of the woodwork and bellyache, but I think they're the minority. The majority, the big boys, the big girls, and the big they-thems are more than willing to jump into an uncomfortable introspective conversation because it's necessary for the profession because it makes us better. I am disappointed to report, and I think we all saw it if you followed the comments, that the dispatchers don't want to do this. Again, if the comment section provides a representative cross-section of dispatchers, and I bet you it does, then I see a group of people who don't have the desire, who lack the maturity, and frankly don't have the stomach to want to improve. I get it. You're stuck with your pro QA algorithm. You're stuck getting QA'd by your bosses. Yeah, when you go to work your next shift and you sit in that chair with the super heavy duty shocks and you put on that headset, you have to follow your procedures and your rules. But so do we. So get out of the friggin' excuse making and victimization echo chamber and practice some goddamn leadership. Talk to your bosses. Tell them what works and what doesn't. Put yourself out there. Stick your neck out. Lead up the friggin' chain of command. It can be done. Trust me. I know it's much easier to sit on your ass and say, it's not my fault, and we are stuck. We don't have a choice. But you can effectuate big changes, and this is where I'm proud of EMS, and we should be proud of ourselves. And I think we need a reminder that we are like this. Yeah, some systems and medical directors, they remain in the Stone Age, but look at us as a whole. We have rapidly evolved, and we have implemented big things. I had a chief retire a couple of years ago, and he had a 45-year career. And when he started, there were still EMS services that were funeral homes that would use the hearse to drive sick people to the hospital when they weren't carting cadavers around. And in the span of one career, EMS has moved from that to things like POCUS, starting antibiotics in the field, crikes, point-of-care blood gases, doing blood work in the field, finger thoracostomy. And you have paramedics who are now better at running codes, managing airways, and interpreting 12-lead EKGs than some emergency medicine physicians. There, I said it. So you think we got there by being a whiny, blame-deflecting group of victims? No. So if you didn't, go back and read the comments from the angry dispatchers. And after each one that lacked any constructive argument, which was about 95% of them, ask yourself, do I want to be like this person? And would I want to work with somebody like this? For those out there who do practice this knee-jerk immediate deflection of any thought or comment that may encroach on long-held beliefs about the way you do things because it consciously or subconsciously infringes upon your comfort zone, and then you immediately move to whine, cry foul, and attack the person who challenges your beliefs, then this closing quote is for you. It comes from the end of the movie Amadeus, and it's by the character who played Antonio Salieri, who was a composer who could never live up to Mozart, and he was the villain of the film. And I think this quote wraps things up nicely. I speak for all mediocrities in the world. I am their champion. I am their patron saint. Mediocrity everywhere. That's what I got, people. Thanks for tuning in.